I'm Thomas, and this is the Mirror in My Cell, a conversation series on the strength, truth, and humanity known through incarceration. My normalish life was interrupted when some stowaway cannabis of mine reappeared at a Belarusian border checkpoint. The charge would be for 3 to 7 years. I was forced to witness myself and understand the power I do have. It changed me in how I saw my life. Now I'm speaking to the others who've been changed by incarceration. This week I spoke to Qasim Javaid, the founder and CEO of an international social enterprise that addresses food waste and sustenance issues across South Asia. The organisation is partnered with huge multinationals like Coca-Cola and Nestle to further their mission, and Qasim has been invited all over the world on diplomatic quests plus to discuss his work and receive numerous accolades in the process. He sounded most proud about the Queen Elizabeth Points of Life Award for his work. Qasim went to prison. So hi Qasim, really nice to be talking with you today.
Glad to be here, and finally we were able to do this after a long back and forth.
Yeah. Um, for me, when I think about who you are, you're basically the kind of person that is like, that I would have wanted to interview or hang out with like before we even overlapped in this prison way, basically. Like you're very accomplished, successful, international, entrepreneurial, altruistic. You're doing really, really cool stuff. And then we have this overlap. That's basically the reason why I think these conversations could be so interesting, because people are going to start recognizing people that are not just like prisoners in the very gritty sense of what people imagine,
Yep.
but also people that are thoughtful, ambitious, sensitive, who are then looking at the world from a totally different angle and able to provide some guidance for what's important and true for how all of us exist, really. So when I just kind of when I put together a picture of who you are and what you're doing with your life, it seems like everything was going super great out of university, basically. Is that fair to say?
Definitely. So
Yeah.
in regards to a bit of background, so I was, studying economics while in my sophomore year at college, and me and two couple of friends of mine decided to do, there's a lot of food wastage. Let's do something about it. And that's how the story started. And fast forward 10 years, we were able to, develop this organization called Rizq, which has an Arabic name, which means sustenance. So it's like holistic sustenance and everything you need to be sustained in life, basically. Not just food or water or something, but it has a lot of spiritual meanings attached to it. So, cutting it short, fast forward 10 years, we were able to transform this into a national organization working around food security, agriculture, youth development, climate action, and we're on the verge of expanding to South Asia specifically. And yeah, and we never looked back basically. So it was all good, all perfect, all fun and games, and a lot of obviously serious stuff because we were doing a lot of on ground community development work. So yeah, and boom, suddenly very interesting and very surprising happens in life.
Yeah. So would you mind telling us what happened, basically?
So one fine day, I'm in my home, and it's a Sunday, and all of a sudden, there's some officials, and they're like asking about me, and my house help goes, and they're like, okay, so is Qasim here? And yeah, my house help's like, yeah, he's here. So, and they kind of started inquiring that where was I on this particular day? I was like, boom. I was like, I was here. So what was the immediate next thing that I was hearing, that I was apparently at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what I realized. And that's not something I realized when I was at that particular place. So that's how the story started. The officials took me, and that's a whole legal process that came into play, basically. I ended up being in prison for a good 5.5 months, fighting my legal battle, proving my innocence, that I definitely was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and I had nothing to do with what was going on at that particular place. I ended up being in prison because my name came in the geofencing list, although there was nothing to do with me and the protest on which I was basically. So that's how the story gelled in together. And everyone's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you Qasim, we know you. You're not, political, and how come you end up in prison?" Because it was national news, and in fact, it was one of the most severe cases in the history of Pakistan in
Wow.
regards to the seriousness, in regards to the repercussions, and in regards to the legal consequences also. So our ex prime minister was ousted from power, and there was a protest going on because he was arrested, and people went to some of the sensitive areas of the city, and there happened to be a lot of violence there, which was
Hmm.
obviously not welcome by the legal authorities. And I happened to be there by chance, and that's how the story united, that I ended up in prison at the end of the day.
I think that story really illustrates kind of what I want to convey with some of these conversations. I'm hoping that people can recognize themselves and just the randomness of their own lives in some of these situations that other people just really
Definitely. So
randomly
you
end up
you
in.
talk about randomness. So I actually, when I recall that day, it was the 14th of May, Sunday. I am in my PJs in my home. In fact, I had a meeting that particular afternoon with a very strategic a partner of ours, with whom we were planning on expanding one of our programs at the organization, right? So we had fairly recently, started this whole agricultural division in our organization. So this partner happened to be one of the big national players in regards to food. So we were like collaborating on one particular idea, and boom, the next moment, I end up in prison, and for the next 5.5 months, I don't know what my life looks like. And at one particular point
Yeah.
in time, I even thought, am I even gonna go out or not? I'm gonna be here for the rest of my life, you know?
Mm,
So that's how random
crazy.
life can be. That's how that random life can be, for sure.
Yeah. And was your impulse initially to like try and make sense of what was happening to you? Was it something that it felt like it was even possible to make sense of or understand?
No, to be very honest, because whatever was happening was unprecedented in the history of the country. So we had never seen such circumstances. I had personally been never involved in such a circumstance, which was like very, very out of my control, right? Except for, when you have accidents, when you have deaths or things like that, like due to like very natural causes, I believe. But apart from that, usually I am kind of a person who is in control of situation, right? Because
Mm,
of some basic foresight, some basic intellect, and knowing certain people in certain parts of the world, right?
yeah.
So, but this was such a serious case because the legal authorities at the most top level of the country were involved, and it was a prestigious institution of the country which was kind of attacked and hijacked, basically. So
Yeah.
that's why the legal authorities took a lot of serious note in that particular regard. So that's
Hmm.
why there was a lot of strictness in regards to whoever was there. Everyone's like a freaking criminal. So that's how they treated everyone, right? And in regards to being making sense out of it, I initially thought, okay, I've been arrested, and there's certainly a mismanagement of certain proofs that, okay, I was there, but let me tell them that I have no political affiliations and I have no such interest that I would take part in certain violence activities. And this is what my profile is of the past 10 years.
Mm,
These very legal authorities, government departments, they have been the one who have been acknowledging and recognizing the work that I have been doing since the past 10 years. Because my organization had been recognized by the national media, by the international media, and a lot of organizations, both nationally and internationally. So it's like, okay, it's gonna take a couple of days. Initially, I thought a couple of hours, but then I was like, okay, the process is, as such, it's going to take a couple of days, and let's see when the investigation, takes place. And I'm going to tell them that I am not at all associated with anything. But
mm.
everyone's like, You were there. That's it. You're a culprit. And I exactly remember the moment when I literally lost hope. So while I was being investigated and being asked questions that what's your name, where were you on this particular day and time, etc., etc. So I was like, hey, listen, I have a flight to catch. So it was my brother's graduation ceremony. So I'm talking about the 14th of May. So my brother's graduation ceremony is next month, June, right? So I was like,
Yeah.
I have booked my brother's graduation ticket to the US. I'm gonna fly next month. Will all this mess be sorted by next month? And it's like, I recommend you to cancel the flight. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Mm.
what's happening here? And it was
Mhm.
after a month. I was like, oh no, this is going to take a lot of time. And I had no idea that what the legal procedures and processes are. So basically, I had no clue, no idea in regards to what's going to happen next in regards to the legal process. So the people
Mm.
who knew the legal process, they knew that, they're going to be here for a month's time at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I couldn't make sense of any of this, literally.
Mm.
I had no idea that I'm gonna go to court next, then I'm gonna go to the jail next, and then we're gonna have multiple appearances at the court, how all this legal process and cycle works. No clue, man.
Yeah. And was it clear the length of the sentence that you were potentially gonna be in prison for? Was that immediately apparent?
So basically, so after being arrested by the police officials, we appeared at the court, and the court sent us to the jail, to the prison, right? So apparently the investigation was going on, and we had to appeal after a certain time, right? So
Yeah.
when we got the first challan, at in while in prison, when I got my first challan and saw the case, so I still remember it had offenses which had sentence up till lifetime prison.
Wow. That's,
Non-bailable,
tricky word to
non-bailable
read.
offenses. Yep, non-bailable offenses, lifetime prison, and whatnot. There were like freaking 30 odd offenses on that.
Insane.
That's like, oh wow, that's some like serious stuff going on here.
Yeah.
you
And
know?
it's so funny. Or I had something quite similar with like missing a flight as well, where like I was supposed to be on a flight like 2 days later. I was supposed to be speaking at a conference like 3 days after I
Wow.
got arrested or whatever. And like your first is like, fuck, I'm not gonna make this. And then it's like,
Yeah.
wait, this is now like 3 to 7 years that I'm looking at, and like somehow the like
Yep.
emotional hit of missing my flight is like
Yep.
the
Yep.
same
Yep.
as like
Yep.
this is gonna be 10 years.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
But I find it crazy as well when you talk about being, because you're the CEO of this company, right? And you're saying I'm normally the guy
Yeah.
that's like
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
who's in control of a situation. I understand what's happening. I know the factors which are important and which are going to
Yeah.
determine which direction this goes in here. Because I kind of, since I got out of prison, I basically said I want to start a company as well. But then I realized it felt like it was too soon, and I was kind of like, I'm not ready to be the guy who knows exactly what's happening and is in control of the situations. I'm not ready to tell investors or co-founders or whatever, like I'm the guy who's in control of everything. Like I've
Yeah.
just been through this crazy
Yeah. Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
so I want to look after myself for a little bit. But it's interesting that you went through that process like the other way around and kind of like arrived
Other
as
way
a
around.
person who's
Yeah.
in control of things, and then suddenly you
Yeah.
have to like give up control
Give up
and kind of just
everything.
like,
Like give up
yeah.
everything, and you're on the whims of people of the system, which is totally against you, basically.
So what was that experience like for you, moving from being a person who's in control of stuff and kind of says what's going to happen next to being a person that has no
So
idea what's
I
going to.
so those 5.5 months, they have multiple journeys and stories within itself, right?
Yeah.
So initially it was really, really frustrating because I had no idea what was going on, and I was like expecting, my fellow network people to be, doing something and get me out of
Mhm.
here, right? Because
Mhm.
I was with my couple of other co-founders, in fact, right? So I was like, things gonna make sense, and I'm gonna just get out. But we applied for a bail at the court, and the bail got rejected. And when that got rejected from the basic lower court, so I was like, okay, so it's time to kind of internalize what's going on, because before than that, I was like kind of in a denial phase, and very hopeful that I'm just gonna get out in a couple of days, 2 more days,
Yeah.
next day, next day, next day. So that's how
Yeah.
your mind is
Recognize that.
ticking, right? So you can
Yeah.
relate it very, very firmly. But after that happened, and it was within a month's time that this happened, so I internalized it. And that's when I started making a lot of peace with myself, that this is where I'm gonna be. And that's when nature started bestowing a lot of blessings, to be very honest, and blessings in the form of very amazing people. So I got attached with a lot of interesting, artistic, altruistic, and all sorts of people, basically. And interestingly, I met so many people who had actually known my work. A lot of people did not know me
Wow.
personally, but a lot of people knew the work that I've been doing. In fact, I met a couple of people who had interned at my organization, volunteered
No
at my
way.
organization. Just imagine, like so
Yeah, good networking
random.
in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was like, oh wow, that's like a whole network and ecosystem that's kind of developed, and people of all kinds of ages, right? People, children younger than me. So I'm 30 right now. So I was like in touch with 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds. People younger than me, people of the
Mm.
same age, and people elder than me. In fact, I just talked to someone today whom I met while being in prison, and he was like
Wow.
65. So
Mhm.
from all the way from 18 to 65, that is the
Mm.
kind of age limit. And
Mm.
interestingly, people from all kind of demographies, social demographics, all kind of backgrounds. So it was really interesting to gel in with all kinds of diverse people like this. You know,
Mm.
I had spent a lot of time while mobilizing different kinds of diverse stakeholders, but living with all of them, oh
Mm.
man, it was a different ballgame altogether. So it
Yeah.
taught me a lot of patience, resilience, courage, independence. We hear all these words, but I
Mm.
realized the meanings of each and every word. Like, what does
Mm.
patience actually means? That
Yeah.
you know
It's so
we're like,
true.
oh, I'm just being patient. If you're in a conversation and someone says something that you don't like, oh, I'm just being patient. But hey, you don't know what patience actually means. You
Yeah.
don't know what tolerance actually means. You don't know what being resilient actually means. That you don't
Yeah.
know what's gonna happen, how your life is here with 60 people in one hall, right? And it's
Yeah.
just a madhouse 24
Yeah.
freaking 7. And
Wow.
in that
Mhm.
madhouse, you have to position yourself in such a way that you're protected, you're respected, you're heard when it needs to be. Basically, that's it.
Mm. That's so interesting. That was a side of prison that I
Yeah.
never experienced. We were just in a box all day, like 6 by 4 meters. So we didn't experience this kind of like
Oh, okay,
parallel society
okay,
thing in quite the
okay,
same way. But
okay,
it was
okay.
even in that kind of in that setting, it was
Yeah.
so interesting how the characters were such a big part of it. And something that's so
Yep. Yep. Yep.
isolating, it was very instructive how important connecting with people and kind of like really properly spending time with someone, like properly getting to the depths of who they are and seeing that reflected in you somehow was such a
Yep.
big part of it. That felt like one of the big things that made me realize about how different my life outside of prison was and had been because of how, despite being surrounded by people, the amount of time that I was actually putting effort into understanding who someone was or why they felt the way they did about the world was
Yeah.
so minimal compared to how I was existing in prison. And even I remember I had another conversation a couple of weeks ago, but on leaving prison, I really had this kind of like empathy overload almost. I got back to Berlin, so obviously the city of like millions of people, like,
Yeah.
and this is like a week and a half after being let out of prison and just being like overwhelmed by the richness of life that was around me, seeing every single person and knowing that each of them had a it's like momentous, deep story to them. But like in a city of like 3 million people, that's obviously just like a totally unsustainable way to like perceive the world, basically. But I find it so interesting that that was one of the first things that you seek to explain about your experience was the level of connection that you had with the people
Yeah,
around
the
you and
level
how
of
important it was.
connection, that was, I think that was the highlight of my 5.5 month experiences. Definitely.
Hmm.
Because I
And
think
what?
that kept
Yeah.
me going in a very interesting manner.
Hmm. And were there when you were kind of existing in that like micro society, were there things that
Yeah.
you felt like you understood better about mainstream outside society from having seen it on a small
110%.
scale? Yeah.
110%. I was like, so this whole barrack, so it was a barrack which had on average 60 people, right? And like I
Mhm.
told you, people from literally all across the country and all sorts of background. Like, for example, literally a person who sells vegetable on a cart to someone who's a billionaire.
Wow.
And this was the
Mhm.
spectrum in which there were different kinds of people and different ages, 18 to 65. You know?
Yeah.
So I was like, this is like the whole country put up in this barrack. These 60 people are representing the whole country of 220 million people. So that's how I
Mm.
kind of saw everything,
Mhm.
that how someone behaves, how someone thinks, how someone acts on certain ways, and so on and so
Mm.
forth. So it was
Mhm.
such a wonderful experience. I was like, it's a whole psychology class going on in
Yeah.
person. You're experiencing everything that you're taught in a human behavior or a psychology class.
Yeah. 100%. And is it I
Yeah,
mean, I think this feels like one of the points where I'm kind of when I went into this project, I felt like I saw the risk that people might listen to these conversations and hear just like just good times and exciting stories and personal
yeah,
revelations from time in prison. That's obviously not what prison is for most people. And I think
yeah.
that is definitely reflected in the types of situations people arrive at prison in, basically, who what their background was to bring them to that position means that often they're not the type of person to be able to reflect on or take the best out of one of these dark moments. Do you think that there's qualities about you that made you more able to kind of like appreciate that and learn from the situation or kind of take
I
control of the
think,
situation?
yeah, I think that's a very, very valid and a very significant point that you raised, because I took this whole experience very positively. Like at least 90% of the time, I took the experience very positively. But when I saw around myself, 90% of the people took it in a very different way, to be very honest. And in a
Mm,
very miserable kind of a way, to be very, very honest, right? Because a lot of people were married, right? So people had their wives waiting for them, people had their children waiting for them, people had their daughters. I mean, it was all kind of emotional roller coaster that I would see on a daily basis. So
yeah.
but I was kind of unique in such a way that all my family is kind of abroad. So my both the siblings, they live out of Pakistan. My dad, he lives out of Pakistan. My mother, she passed away 10 years back. So I wasn't really interlinked or gelled in with a very close knit nuclear family system. So that played a very important role. I was quite independent in a lot of ways, that I were to be at different places all the time and meeting different sorts of people. So I literally took this experience in a very similar manner. Okay. So I have a journey on which I am to, freaking change the world or impact the world in interesting ways. However, I think that what my mission is, I took this experience as a part of my same journey, that, okay, so the nature wants me to freaking slow down, and introspect and reflect on what I've been doing and what I have to do. So this is part of the similar journey. So that's how I majorly took this experience, which
Mhm.
gave a very unique perspective. And this is exactly what I was telling to a lot of people that, whom I met while being in prison. That, hey guys, relax yourselves, chill out. It's all gonna, end soon, because that's where you are right now. And that's when I understood the power of now. Majority of the time we're always stuck either in the past or in the future. It's a very common thing that everyone talks about,
Mm.
but this is exactly what I realized. Like, in
Mhm.
such a world which is full of digital connections, right? For example, you interviewing me right now, we are in different parts of the world, and different people from different parts of the world will see this. But where I was, there was no digital footprint. It was all human connections. And the human connections that were present literally right across me. That's it. And
Mm.
there was no other sort of communication taking place. So you could
Mm.
just meet your family or friends once a week legally. That's it. And boom, there's no other communication with the external world. So that
Mm.
gave me a lot of sense of what time is all about. So it's a very relative concept, right? So
Yeah.
I can pick up my phone and put 10 people on the call, and being all boom, 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 take up flight, etc. But I when I went there, I literally saw time slowing down. And people were like, how did you spend time without your phone? I was like, when I came out of prison, I did not know how I'm gonna use the phone ever again now.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
the first 2 weeks when I came back, I was like, that's too fast for me. People
Yeah.
messaging me, people calling me. I'm not used to all of this. My body's not used to all of this. My mind's not
Yeah.
used to all of this.
Yeah.
I need some time to digest, to absorb all of
Mhm.
this. So
Mm.
so that's how your body, your mind, and your soul literally adapts to situations. So a human
Mm.
being a very resilient and a social animal, that's when I actually experienced it day in, day out.
Mm.
That when I told my mind that this is what it is, my mind just adapted accordingly. And
Mm.
one fun fact. So I gained literally like 25 pounds in those 5.5 months.
Wow.
And people are like, people go to jail, people go to prison, and they lose weight because they are
Yeah.
worried, they are in tension, and they don't have good food to eat. I was
Mm.
like, I think I had the most peaceful time in those 5.5 months, like majority of that particular time, because I knew
Yeah.
that's what my reality is, and I cannot change my reality,
Yeah.
and this is what it is. The kind of
Yeah.
peaceful sleeps I have had, the kind of dreams I had seen, the kind of, notes I took, and the kind of, writings I did and prayers I made. I
Mm.
think those were one of the most heartful and soulful prayers that I've ever made in my 30-year-old life.
Wow.
You know?
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you raise so many good points there, and I recognize so much of what you're talking about. But I definitely think, I mean, especially like the power of now is something that really came through to
Yeah,
me and
yeah,
seeing, and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
kind of one of the first things I would wake up every day and I would kind of like look out the window, which is like bars in the window. You can't even see out the window. And I would tell myself, like, there's no point looking backwards. Like, all there is like existing in the present moment, and that is
Yeah,
something that's very like liberating in a way, almost, to be like the person I am doesn't need to have anything to do with who I was yesterday. And actually
yeah,
it's a conscious choice about how I behave right now,
yeah,
and that is the definition of who I am. I'm in a room with seven other people. They have no idea
yeah.
about my job title. They have no idea about my family or what
Exactly.
university I went to. Like, it's just how I behave
Exactly.
right now.
This
Yeah.
is this is music to my ears. This so
Yeah.
this is what I realized, because every day in our lives, what really matters to ourselves and the people around us are all these things, that which college did I go to, what title do I have, which family I belong to, etc., 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 right?
Mhm.
But in that particular moment, I was a fellow prisoner with 200 others. That's it.
Mm.
That's what my justification and role at that particular point in time is. That's it.
Mhm. Mm.
So you have to let go a lot of, you know, barriers that you have onto your own self. And what I saw was all those barriers coming out and me being in my rawest, in my most vulnerable sense, and realizing who I actually am at the end of the day.
Mm.
I'm just a
Mhm.
simple human being. These are all just simple human beings. Majority of them, are not even guilty. Majority of them are innocent like me. And that's
Mhm.
what life can be. And that's when I
Mm.
realized that we used to hear all these stories about, injustices. We would see all these national or international coverages that how people are mistreated, people have issues around injustice. And all those are headlines. We listen to those headlines, we see those headlines, and we just move on to the next thing of our daily routine. Sounds like today I'm a part of this headline in someone else's life, and they're
Yeah.
just like keeping on with their daily routine as I used to do 6 months back. Sounds like,
Yeah.
oh shit, that's like a whole different new perspective to life.
Because I think that's something, especially in the West, in the kind of circles, bubbles that I'm part of, basically, people concern themselves with the grand macro injustices of
Yeah,
like the modern world. And
yeah,
then I mean, I definitely think in your case and me as well, in some case, like I was a headline, I was a scary thing that people were reading about and talking about.
yeah,
How did that like what was that experience, especially because in the context of you having started a company that like addresses
yeah.
those like macro scale problems? How did it feel to suddenly be like a very present and individual piece of world injustice at that point in time, or suffering in a way?
So it was kind of very ironic, to be really honest. It was really
Yeah.
ironic that, I have been talking about injustice throughout the past 10 years, and this is on what I've, based my organization's mission. For example, we talk a lot about the injustices that a small farmer faces within our food ecosystems, right? And how he's or she's the person who's like the most worse off. And there are companies making millions and billions of profits out of the sheer hard work that a small farmer does on that piece of land, right? So, and all of a sudden, I'm facing this particular injustice in a certain way, and it's like, okay, so is this all happening to make me realize that what injustice actually means? So I'm like much more aggressive towards my work, So I'm like
Mm.
trying to. I'm a sort of person who always think that nothing happens randomly. So I have a firm belief on this, a
Mhm.
very firm belief that there's nothing like randomness, there's nothing like coincidences. Everything happens for a reason, everything's meant to be, and there's like nature making sure that where you have to go and all the things are aligning accordingly. And,
Yep.
there's a famous quote of Steve Jobs that, one part of it says that when you look back, that's only you can connect the dots backwards, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer of that. So, in that particular regard, I was constantly thinking that okay, this has to do something with the journey that I'm in. It has to do something with making me more humble, making me more grounded, and making me actually realize that the problems an average individual in my country faces at a very, very grassroots level. So I have
Mm.
worked with people at the grassroots, but this time around, I've been given the experience of living with those people, which is a
Yeah.
very, very unique experience. So that's how
Mhm.
I took it. And when I came out, so a lot of people were very sympathetic towards me. Oh, we are really sorry to, hear about this and that, blah, blah, blah. And every time I was like, hey, relax yourself. I mean, I was in a good place. Chill out.
Yeah.
And they all
Yeah.
of a sudden they get just, really, taken aback and shocked that there's this person saying that he was okay, he was all right. He
Mm.
wasn't beaten there, he wasn't, kicked there, things like
Yeah.
that. Wasn't
Yeah. Yeah.
he
Yeah.
abused there? So the general phenomena in regards to being in prison is, you're tortured mentally, physically, verbally, etc., etc. So this is a
Mhm.
general
Cold, hungry. Yeah.
phenomena.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, kept hungry, right? So that's the general phenomena. So everyone thought that I was like tortured brutally in a lot of ways, and they showed me a lot of sympathy. And I was like, hey man, I don't need all these sympathies. I was at a good place, and just relax yourself.
Yeah. 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 It is. It's kind of in a weird way. It's a bit like death somehow, or like the way that it felt, and the way that I was kind of writing to the outside world, and the way that
Yep.
everyone was treating
Yeah.
me. The
Yeah.
closest
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
compare it to was as if I had died and no one knows what to say.
Yep. Yep.
No one
Yep.
wants
Yep.
to
Yep.
pretend they
Yep.
know what it's like to die somehow. And
Yes.
that was kind
Yes.
of the
Yes.
same as it was with prison in
Very,
a
very
way.
rightly said. Very, very rightly said. Because so I'm being so comfortable in talking about all these things with you because I know that you're someone who understands this.
Hmm.
You can relate to this, who understands this, and completely know where I'm coming from. But I'm like very hesitant in regards to talking about this with people, like majority of the people whom I encounter, because ever since I've come out, everyone is like, "Oh, where were you? So we heard this happened, blah blah blah," and I'm like very formal about this conversation generally, just
Yeah.
because of the very same fact that people cannot relate to it, people don't know what it was like, and it's like too hard of a story to tell to people. Like it's not possible that someone understands it, right? Because it's
Yeah.
it's, it's a very different and a unique experience, all of holistically.
Yeah. But my experience, it was very interesting, and it was exactly one of those things. I think it relates to two of the things that you mentioned already, which was the kind of like learning what some of these words mean, basically, or hearing something that's like it's obvious, everyone says it, but then it's a so totally different thing to actually
Yeah,
know it truly. And that was something that, because I was in this space where no one could relate, and also, I mean, no one was acting like they could relate in some ways. People being like, "That sounds like when I was on swimming camp before university or whatever," uh, which to be honest, I always enjoyed hearing. But it was the situation where the only person whose experience I could trust of prison was my own, and that was quite a
yeah,
unique position to be in, where so much of my life beforehand had been, I think it was mainly coming from me, but I felt like everyone was so aware and everyone had such a stake in how I was behaving. And it felt so often like I was doing something wrong, or not using my time well, or not checking my privilege, or not setting the right career goals, or whatever it was. It felt like there was this kind of like incessant commentary on how I was existing. And then the experience of prison, both inside, when I was realizing this is my experience, and this is what I turned this into what I turn it into, and on the outside, the way that people kind of like treated me and spoke about it, it allowed that sensation to continue in some ways, with me saying like, okay, like me trusting myself, listening to myself, making space to have my have my true feelings come through is so important. And once that's there, then I can really live my life in a meaningful and trusting way, and not question all of the stuff that I'm doing, which was super unique. So maybe some of that resonates with you as well.
definitely. So it's really interesting and fascinating to hear similar stories because all these stories are tales of immense truth, immense
Mm.
honesty, and a lot of purity and sincerity at the same time. Because you are at your rawest and thinking of all these feelings, they are in its true essence,
Mm.
without any filters and without any exaggerations and so on and so forth.
Mm. And I think that links so much to what you were describing with the phone as well, because I think
Yeah.
that is really one of the things where I came out and like, this is actually stopping me from feeling things. This is stopping me from thinking things. Like the
Oh
way
my
that I
God.
jumped to this, the way that
Yeah.
this fills every empty moment, it was those empty moments which defined the nature of my experience and defined all of the progress and
Yep.
insights that I made was those empty spaces. And it's not the case that you sit there and your mind is blank and nothing happens, you don't move forward in life if there's blankness. It's immense truth and beauty comes through when there's nothing else to crash in or take up that space. It's both damning in how big of a revelation is, but also how small of a revelation is of
Yep.
just how much your phone brings you away from living in the present moment or
Yep.
listening to yourself or understanding yourself. That was a crazy insight for me.
110%. Very, very rightly said. Because when you just are about to getting a revelation, you just pick up your phone and you're like, oh, social media, checking, what's happening, who's calling, who's texting, and your chain of
Mm,
thoughts just, wander away.
mm,
And so in this day and age, man, this is the biggest distraction that we have, definitely, to just
mm,
really know our own self and use our
mm,
own intellect. Because I mean, I certainly believe that human being is a very, very powerful species on Earth, on the face of this Earth. The kind of resilience, patience, adaptability, even all our different body parts have, your brain, your mind, your soul, your body overall. So it's just so adaptive and so quick in terms of responding to situations, right? When you
mm,
have a fearful situation, how does your mind overall respond to that? When it's a happy moment, how do you cherish those moments? So your body is adapting to all these situations. And when I had these moments within these 5.5 months when I was inside, I think the happiness, I had never experienced such kind of happiness. I had never experienced such kind of fear. I had never
mm,
experienced such kind of sadness,
mm,
you know? Because
mm.
it was, like I was mentioning before, in its most rawest form that there could be. And
Yeah.
the genuine human connections that I made, it was just because of the fact that we were all in a survival mode. We, all of us, could not help each other in any way, except, I could share my things with someone, I could share my food with someone, and that's the most we could do to each other.
Mm,
Other than that, if someone's being compassionate with you still in that particular situation, so that meant a lot to me. If someone
mm,
was giving me a sincere advice in that particular moment, it meant a lot to me, because
mhm,
that's the genuine and the real human connect that we have and
mm,
we should cherish,
mhm,
without any self-interest, without any, ambiguities apart from that.
mhm. What you're talking about in terms of like the purity of the sensations is something that also is a makes a lot of sense to me and was also something that felt like it I had never been able to experience in the same way.
Yeah.
Everything felt so diluted. What was it
Yep.
like in those moments for you where you were kind of like experiencing something dark in a very pure way or something extremely negative? Because that's also something that
Yeah.
in normal life you don't bad things will happen, but it's still often quite
Yeah. Yeah.
diluted in
Yeah.
comparison to a place
So
like prison.
definitely. So in terms of that situation, it was just really, really dark. Like, what
Mm,
you actually mean that there's actually a dead end to it. But
mm,
that's when I think that I'm a bit religious. I try to keep a balance between, my prayers. So I think that's where faith came in, where faith used to take over. So
yeah,
I kind of saw it as, a test of faith at the end of the day, and I recalled, so in our Islamic history, there have been a lot of figures, prominent figures, which are very significant in the Islamic history. So what kept me going was when I was in those darkest moments, I would just recall one of those figures who have been in such prominent positions, yet in such dark situations and at the whims of the tyrants of their own times.
Yeah.
So I would just recall all those stories that my mom used to tell me when I was a child, and all of
Mm.
that kept me going like any other thing, to be really honest. And
Mm.
I was like, that's the test of faith. That's the test of faith. I don't have to give up. If I give up, that's when I lose, and I don't have to lose. So I have to keep going. So,
Mm.
you hear all these things that every day is a new day because it's the sun that's rising, right? And you
Mm.
see the sunrise. So interestingly, for 5.5 months straight, I saw the sunrise and I saw the sunset.
Wow.
Because
That's
from my
nice.
barrack, outside my barrack, it was just open. It was literally a ground outside my barrack. So
Mhm.
I could hear birds, singing. I
Mm.
could see the trees, and I could see the trees fall, leaves falling down, and I could see the sunrise and the sunset. So
Wow.
every evening, it was really gloomy for some people because that's when you're just on your own. All the police wardens, they leave you alone and you're just locked, right? So we used to have 2 hours every day where our barrack was open, and we used to go outside in the park and just chill and relax, make some food for ourselves, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So at the time of sunsets, basically. So whenever there was a sunset, people were like all gloomy that they're gonna be just like, left on their own and so on and so forth. But for me, I was just thinking of the next sunrise, that's gonna be a new day, and it might come with a blessing. And no, I don't know what that blessing could be. And most of the time, that blessing would be in the form of homemade food.
Nice.
Most of the time, it was in the form
Sounds like a good
of,
blessing.
yep, yep. And most of the times, it was in the form of a book that I was, really looking forward to read. So,
Mm.
that's how I kept myself going on a daily basis in those very dark and dull moments that it's just literally moving on to the next moment. Yeah, okay, let's be patient, let's be tolerant, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. That sounds so powerful. I'm so happy for you that you were able to, like, especially with the son, have that relationship. I'm sure that was like quite a source of quite
Yeah, so
profound,
I'm
like,
saying all these things to be honest. I'm also recalling all these things because
yeah.
right now, ever since the past, so on October 31st, it's gonna be 1 year that I came out of prison this October,
Okay.
right? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
it's like the
Happy
one
anniversary.
year anniversary is just
Yeah. Yeah.
nearby, bro. So
Yeah.
when I'm saying all these things, I'm actually recalling all these things for my own self too, because I have
Yeah.
literally forgotten all these things, and I'm still again on that particular drill, day in, day out, work, work,
Yeah.
work, travel, 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 and there's no time for anything else, no time for introspection, no time for reflection, and like, shit, I'm again in that cycle from which the nature took me away, and I'm trying to
Mm.
do my best to get into that freaking cycle again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
It is,
So
yeah, it's
it's
a
like a
strange double
different,
life. Mhm.
yeah, so it's like a strange double life that I'm like, okay, is this real or was that real? There was a
Mm.
time, oh my, between you and me, I was like, is this jail or was that jail, to be
Yeah,
honest?
yeah, yeah. I
I I
totally
actually
recognize that.
I actually started asking myself, okay, is this freedom or was that freedom? Although I
Mm.
was like caged and all, protected and I could not go out, but I felt
Mm.
so free because
Mm.
all I had was my own self. But
Mm.
now I'm apparently free. I could travel anywhere, I could go anywhere, but all I don't have is my own self.
Mm. It's,
You
yeah, it's
know,
so true
it's
and
it's
it's so
quite it's
sad.
quite strange because
Yeah.
Every day it's a new struggle right now. Okay, so what I'm gonna wear? How do I look? I mean, so many things. For 5.5 months, I did not care how do I look, what I was wearing. No one judged, nothing at all,
Mm.
no pressures.
Mhm. Mm.
And all
It
these
was
things are keeping you in a constant pressure cooker environment, which we are not realizing day in, day out. But that's there in our subconsciousness.
yeah. That was also one of the things that I felt when I was kind of like seeing people coming out, and it was really interesting for me because like I wouldn't say that I felt many new emotions whilst I was in prison. Really was just like the purity and the strength of the
Yep,
emotions that I felt, which was the
for
thing that
sure.
made a
Yep,
difference. And I was sort of recognizing the stuff that I was working through in my normal life and the things I was stressed out by, or the things I was sad about, or the things that I was happy about. And they weren't too different from I basically had so much more respect for the chat, like just the normal struggles that people go through in their daily life, and I feel like that was one of the things which I had been in my life previously telling myself, "Why are you stressed out about that? You're being ridiculous. Like, why do you wish you had achieved this
yep,
thing or gone to this party or knew this situation?" It was all of this stuff which I was the emotions were there, but I was not letting them be there. They were getting crowded out by other emotions, and there was also me telling myself that I was being ridiculous for even feeling that thing in the first place. And it was the process of being in prison where it's, I mean, number one, you're in such an extreme place, and like we said, no one's going to tell you that you're doing it wrong. But number two, you're in a headspace where you just trust yourself so much more, and you allow yourself to feel things. And I really hope people understand that the stuff that they go through in their lives is not trivial or not
yeah,
it's not illegitimate that they feel intense emotions around the things which do make them sad, make them happy, make them scared, make them angry. Like those are all legitimate ways to feel about the basically very stressful and imprisoning factors which do determine a lot of what modern life is. Um, I think the solution is to find a way to have that space to allow the emotions that do determine your existence and then
yeah,
let
yeah, yeah.
some truth come through.
So it's really easy to say all these things, but kind of implementing them on a daily
Yeah.
basis, it's like a constant struggle, to be honest.
Yeah. Does that how does that make you feel, or what's your approach been to making sure you can keep that double life going?
That's like a $1 million question, to be honest.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and to be honest, I'm actually sometimes I actually struggle in this. I'm going to be
Mm,
honest because you've seen certain parts of reality, and then you think, okay, this is the normal path that life is going. Okay, this is reality. Then you're kind of confused at what's the reality, what's actually
mm,
meaningful, what's actually purposeful. If life is so uncertain and so random, so what's the need for just being doing all of this? Even at the end of the day, you could end up
mm,
just impacting one life. Why do I have to impact a million lives? you know
mm,
Things
mhm,
like that, questions like these.
mm,
So yeah, I'm actually asking all these questions myself and introspecting and kind of consolidating the past 10 years specifically of my this particular journey, because it's gonna
yeah.
be 10 years next year, April,
Okay. Wow, lots of
on this
anniversaries
particular
this year.
journey. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's
Mhm.
that's the kind of questions that I am actually asking myself. And
Do you notice what you learn and what you experience coming through in how you act in the business, or kind of like how you treat your role as a CEO of a very important company?
yeah, I think so. That has given me a lot of courage in a lot of ways, and in
Mhm.
terms of decision making, in terms of taking things easy, in terms of sometimes taking things very serious, so on and so forth. So that particular experience has impacted in a lot of positive ways, I believe.
Mhm.
And I could relate to people a lot. So that's another plus that has been there. But again, at the same times, I sometimes get more frustrated and more annoyed, at the
Mm.
same time, because I kind of think that people, how come they just don't know the basic realities and the basics of life? Then I have to tell myself, okay, relax. I myself did not know them, maybe 6 months
Yeah.
back or something like that. So it's all about the experiences and the exposures you have in life, right? So
Hmm.
so yeah, that's like the tricky part around it, to be honest.
Okay.
But in terms of,
Interesting.
but in terms of gauging people, so that has been, kind of very a good tool in my toolbox, right? Because I met
Mm.
couple of thousand people literally in those 5.5 months. So,
Yeah.
and people of all kinds and all sorts, right? I told you before. So that has given me a lot of courage and sense of judgment to, kind of engage with different kinds of people.
Hmm. And then what would you, because I mean, we opened the conversation by saying we need to be aware that not everyone is able to find this kind of experience within prison.
Yeah.
Conversely, have you got suggestions for how people could learn these types of things about themselves without going to prison? Maybe are there certain types of people that you've met who you see replicating these thought process without having been
Yeah,
caught
so
up in horrible
yeah,
stuff?
yeah. So some of the people who kind of have similar experiences were, for example, people. So one of my mentors at work, so he went through this very fatal kind of accident where he was bedridden for 3 months. So he could actually relate to a lot of things that I was talking to him about, right?
Yeah.
Because it was again where he felt patience, tolerance, resilience,
Mm.
helpless, so on and so forth, right? Did not know what's going to happen next. So these are all the common themes. And most of the people around, they have seen these kind of experience, these kind of things in different experiences in life. A lot of people
Mm.
have experienced death of a very closed one. A lot of people have experienced breakups with their other partners being really close to them. So all these kinds of experiences definitely tell you something, but the whole idea is we don't really take all these lessons. A lot of times we just continue in our daily life. We don't have all those moments where you reflect, you take the time down and slow down, write stuff, so on and so forth. Because every day, can you imagine, for 5.5 months, I kept a notebook and I took notes of every single day. And I would recall my every day. I would write down what happened. And I would
Mm.
write my thoughts. Okay, this is what I'm thinking.
Mm.
Consistently throughout the 5.5 months. And I think that's the most consistent I've ever been in something all my life.
Mm.
So that's the kind of discipline. If we bring all these disciplines in our lives, so I definitely think that we can, learn from the experiences that the world and the nature is putting onto us. And you don't have to end up in prison to, kind of realize all these
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought that for me to halting down and stopping down, nature had to put me into prison because I was like
Okay.
all around the place.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it
So
takes something big, for
yeah,
sure.
I
But
so
I think it doesn't take too much to go so much
yeah,
deeper in a way.
yep,
It's literally leaving. If you could allow yourself 10% longer before you picked up your phone, if you could
That's it.
spend
That's it.
10% more time thinking to yourself,
As simple as
yeah,
that, Oscar. Yeah, it's if you could just give, if you could just give 2 minutes to yourself every day, 2 minutes, 160
mm,
seconds. That's all it's required.
mm, yeah,
but
yeah.
with full concentration, with no distractions.
Yeah, yeah, that's the important part. No
Yeah,
swiping on through WhatsApps.
yeah,
Wow, Kasim, it's been such a beautiful conversation.
definitely,
I'm so
definitely, it
grateful
has
that
been.
you've been
No,
in.
my pleasure. It was a very good experience for me to recall all these things, so I could
Mm,
implement what I was missing and not focusing on. I think it's again a reality check for me. That's how I'm gonna take it. The nature is making me recall all these things. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
something
yeah.
to be, done.
Yeah, happy to help, and I'm sure lots of other people are gonna be really moved by what you've said and how you look at
Yeah, yeah,
things as
yeah, yeah.
well. It's
I
been
hope so, and I hope so, definitely.
yeah,
That's the whole idea behind it.
it's a really
And
it's a
actually,
beautiful take on
yeah,
life.
yeah, and actually, thank you for initiating this, because I think this is a very, very much needed kind of a thing where people need to hear these basic raw stories of people who like you mentioned, were like normal people, not like
Mm,
criminals or someone, and people need to
mhm,
hear from them what are these experiences all about. So I
mm.
mean, thumbs up to you for taking out this
Thank you.
initiative, and I hope that you're successful in the objectives and the mission that you are kind of taking forward, and happy to
Thank you
help
very
in
much.
any other way that there could be, for sure.
That's so kind, Qasim. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to The Mirror in My Cell. Consider sharing or subscribing to catch the thrice monthly conversations. Thanks.